Good evening and welcome to the 7 o'clock hearing of the Board of Appeals. My name is Nicholas Gray. I will be the acting chair for this evening. Attorney Michael Brown is unavailable this evening. So Member Mullen and I will be proceeding, taking evidence for the hearing, and Acting Chairman Brown will catch up by reviewing the video later. So with me tonight is my fellow board member, Jeffrey Mullen. And yeah, that's the member of the Board of Appeals for this evening. So I believe for this evening, we have on a presentation perhaps from the applicant on some revised materials that were received this week. The board received three things so far as I know: a revised plan set of drawings dated August 30th. Oh, sorry, no, revised May. Well, whatever it is, we got a new pack today. I always thought it says revised May 10th, 2022. A stormwater report dated June 29th, 2022, and some 3D renderings of the project aerial views that were dated July 7th, 2022. Mr. Freeman, do you have any thoughts on how we should proceed this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Peter Freeman representing the applicant. No, what you said is accurate. I think we should begin with most likely the presentation of the civil plans and then the changes in the architectural plans. And at whichever time you like, your commentary from your peer reviewers, because I know both Mr. Reardon and Mr. Bomer are here. So we can proceed with Deborah Keller, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Go ahead and proceed. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Deb Keller with Merrill Engineers and Land Surveyors. And would it be okay to share?
Yes.
So hopefully everybody can see the plan. This is the civil plan set. I know mentioned May 10th. I believe that date is on the architecturals.
It is. I said the wrong thing. I'm sorry.
No, that's correct for the architecturals. Our civil set is revised June 29th, just 2022 for clarification. As stated, we have made some changes per our last hearing. Some of the comments that we looked to address, and I'm going to the site layout. I think that one of the biggest components was adding the stairs so that we had access to sort of circumvent walking through the switchback ramp to get down to the sidewalk. So stairs have been added to both of the ramp locations. Mr. Celeberti was able to reach the postmaster and have another discussion with them, and has agreed to move the male pedestals up to near the proposed building in this location where my little hand is now, since the mail truck would actually have to come up and turn around within the site to leave the property. They felt it was reasonable to have the pedestals up this close to the proposed building. With relocating the pedestals, we split up the delivery spaces. We kept one close to the accessible ramp just for, if there's loading dollies or whatever, it was easier to get in accessible if we were next to the ramp. But we did move one designated space close to the male pedestals so that the male truck could come up and park and fill out all the mailboxes and leave and not have to park many spaces down and walked over to the male pedestal. Let's see. We did have some discussion with Mr. Reardon, and one of the questions from a stormwater review perspective, we did have a natural depression up in this area as part of the drainage design. We have removed that. We've maintained a swale to allow for the flow of surface runoff, but have not accounted for any detention in that area as an actual BMP within the drainage report and analysis. And let's see. So we also looked at, I'm gonna move down one more page. We looked at the swale along the northern property line a little closer and have defined a portion of it in this area here that will be a riprap swale with 3 check dams in it to slow the water down. This is where it is at a relatively steeper slope with respect to the existing conditions that are on site. So we want to make sure that we minimize any erosion potential in that area. So we've proposed now a riprap swale for this portion, and the upper portion where it's much flatter will be maintained as a grass swale. That allows for any off-site runoff that comes towards the property to travel around the proposed development to the low point, which is near access road. We have, I'm going to scroll down again to the landscape plan. So we did update the landscaping plan. Oops, I'm gonna stop for a second. Actually, I'll let Jeff review the site distance plan. Let's see. Make this go a little faster. There we go. So the landscaping plan was updated to match. I think one of the questions we had was a little bit of a conflict as to where these trees along the northerly property line would be located with respect to the swale. So we added the swale location to the plan. We were asked to look at enhancing some of the landscaping in this island area at the garage entrance, as well as adding landscaping along the access drive frontage in front of the proposed building. And then I think lastly, we had the site distance plan that was updated. Just slightly. So we added photos to the site distance plan. And
Deb, did you want me to jump in on that?
yeah, sure, Jeff, if you'd like to.
No problem. Appreciate you having me this evening. For the record, Jeff Bandini with McMahon Associates. So we were working with Merrill Engineering and Deb's group to update the site distance plan based on what you had seen previously. And again, as Deb kind of led off with, we included a few photographs looking left and looking right from the existing site driveway to demonstrate that there is no encroachment of the existing vegetation along both looking south and looking north along the east side adjacent to the site driveway. And again, those measurements are taken from 14.5 feet back from the edge of traveled way, measured to the driver eye height, which is reflected in that top graphic there. So that's provided in greater detail on the bottom. And again, just showing that sort of shaded site triangle, if you will, on both sides that show that there is no encroachment on the existing vegetation, both looking left and looking right. On sort of the right side, just south of the site driveway, that site triangle is located outside that set of trees. It's located just south of the site driveway. And north of the site driveway, the site triangle goes in between the existing tree line there. So there is no encroachment of the existing sight lines. That photograph that was added to the plan, the bottom one shows the existing utility pole that is located adjacent to the existing site driveway that would be removed as part of the proposed site driveway. So any sort of perceived site inhibitance of that pole there would not be present in the proposed stages. And we also clarified the note on the plan such that if there is any sort of vegetation that shall encumber upon the town or the Mass DOT right-of-way, that would be cleared and maintained so that the site triangle is absent of any sort of obstruction. And that would be coordinated with the town of Milton and or Mass DOT as needed. So those are the kind of the updates that we've shown here based on the site plan that you had seen previously. And I also wanted to share a clarification too on the site access itself. I know there was a question at the last hearing about the permission of left and or right turns out of the site driveway. Previously, the traffic study had included both lefts and rights out of the driveway. And at the request of the town, we provided a no left turn restriction for the site patrons only, and a permission of the existing residents of the adjacent properties to be able to turn left. So a previous iteration of the plan did include a no left turn sign for condo residents. And based on some discussion, we felt that would be, perhaps more confusion than it was worth. And McMahon did put together a traffic memorandum dated April 11th as part of the records for this project that's provided some additional analysis and detail that maintained that there would not be a significant change in the queuing or level of service if the left turns from the site driveway were permitted. So that change has been reflected in not only the plan included in this, but the signage plan as well, that kind of reflects kind of the consistency with the site driveway and looking left and looking right, stating that there would be, no obstruction for vehicles that are attempting to exit the site driveway, nor for vehicles attempting to travel northbound or southbound along Route 28. So I just wanted to provide that clarification as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Deb.
And then lastly, I'd like to just, we did update the 3D aerial views with those changes. So this is the first aerial view from Randolph Ave looking up into the site. So it shows the stairs connecting to the ramp condition that would be provided, shows some additional, you can see a little bit of the new vegetation at the island at the corner of the proposed building. As I move down, that's another view from Randolph Ave looking up. So some additional vegetation here breaking up that corner. Another view. And then you kind of see here also changing, I believe we spoke about this at the last hearing about looking at changing some of the siding colors to add a little bit more depth to the structure. So let's see. And then I think, so you have a little bit more depth here with colors, siding. And then this was the last view from the access road. And this is where we were talking about adding some, breaking up that facade with some additional vegetation along that face, as well as changing a little bit of the siding colors here to give some more depth to the building. I believe those are all the major changes. We were still working with Sean. I think we've gotten it moved along and have gotten close to meeting his comments, but I will defer to Sean for that part of the presentation, if that sounds okay.
That's fine. Anything else for your presentation at the moment?
Is Andy on, Peter? Does he want to go through the actuals, or should I just go through them briefly?
I don't know if he's here. I didn't see him. Andy, if you're there and would like to do it, you can. Otherwise, Deb, you can keep going.
Okay.
I thought he signed on earlier, but he's not here now. It doesn't look like.
Okay, then Deb, you might as well keep going. Thanks.
So as I mentioned with the 3D views, you don't see it in this graphic on the front here, but we did the siding coloring, changes to give it a little bit more depth are proposed. Let me see. I think the question with respect to the architecturals was discussing bike racks and reviewing how many bike racks could be located within the garage, and it looks like Andy's determined about approximately 16 bikes could be stored in the designated area within the garage. I think those are really the two major changes on the architecturals.
And if I may add, Deb,
Mhm.
Peter Freeman, again, that I think those two items in particular and some of the others, if they didn't come up at the last CBA hearing, they came up at the workshop that we had with
Oh.
Sean Reed and Cliff Bomer in between the last hearing and now.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you, Peter. I mean, I can go through the plans, but I don't believe anything else has changed on the floor plans.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Hearings were the best presentation for the changes that were made on the proposed building itself. We can hop back and happy to answer any questions or let Mr. Reardon speak up.
Why don't I have my fellow board member, Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions you want to ask at this time?
No questions at this time.
All right, I don't know whether to ask my question now or wait till after I've heard from Mr. Reardon, but I'll just, well, what the heck? Maybe this might be for Mr. Bandini, because since it's involving the traffic portion of it, what keeps me up at night about this particular project, right, is the number of units, the number of cars that are going to be on the site and have to exit that building at, well, whatever time of day, and work their way out of that driveway onto Route 28, right? I mean, I drove Route 28 again this morning, at rush hour, and it's, it's well known to be chaotic, and I'm just concerned about the safety of the people who are going to be living in this building trying to exit onto 28. And I understand about the sight lines, and I understand about the studies that have shown this and that, but this is the part that really troubles me. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask, how comfortable are you guys with the safety of people exiting from this property? Because I think this is going to be a major factor in this project going. I mean, it always has been, but it's going to my mind, it's a major concern. And I just want to hear if you're completely comfortable that this is a safe design.
Jeff Bandini with McMahon again. I'll be happy to answer that question. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned all the studies that we've provided that kind of show that it exceeds the, AASHTO requirements for stopping sight distance. And again, that was measured against the 85th percentile speed, which we collected as part of our traffic study. It wasn't, based on speeds that we felt were out there or speed limit or anything like that. Like, we collected the data, we measured it ourselves, and we compared the data, and exceeds that minimum requirement. So in that vein, yes, we're absolutely comfortable. B, we've been through several iterations, just trying to depict the proposed and existing sight lines on the plan, which, I mentioned that we've shown. We've offered to cut down vegetation if there's any sort of limiting factor with respect to sight distance. So, I mean, we can construct this thing and how everything looks in real time. Things get adjusted in the field. We understand that, things get moved, things get, survey is, confirmed or whatever. And that's why we have offered to cut down vegetation if there's any sort of limiting factor. And again, we're not just going to go out there and trim it. We're going to coordinate that with the town and or MassDOT as needed. And the other part about the safety with respect to access, we've discussed, the trip generation portion of this, number of vehicles entering and exiting. It's fairly, I don't want to provide a comparison that minimizes, this overall project, but, given the proposed delay that we're showing, it's fairly minimum in terms of what is considered acceptable by the highway capacity manual in an environment such as this. The delay is under 35 seconds. You know, some folks it might seem a little bit longer to some people than it actually is. And we fully understand that. We understand Route 28 is a four-lane roadway. We understand there's a signal right there. You know, in other situations like this, we've seen the signal create, you know, actually help situations like this where it creates, you know, gaps in traffic for vehicles to be able to access the adjacent roadway. And in situations like that, yeah, we fully understand that, you know, it might take 20 or 30 seconds to get out of there, but, you know, in the broad scheme of things, that's, you know, deemed acceptable. And, you know, hopefully the residents of this project see that as well. Hopefully the town realizes that as well. And, you know, if, you know, we end up going through the Mass DOT approval process, you know, we'll share that information with them. They will see the site distance plan. They'll see the access plan and curb cuts and all that. And they will have a chance. Their permit group will pass this along to their safety section, and the safety section will be able to provide comments on this as well. So, you know, by no means is this, you know, definitely, you know, I would urge you to take my word for it because, you know, we've provided the information that the town has requested, but Mass DOT is going to provide, you know, their professional opinion on this as well. And if there's something that needs to be changed or modified as a result, you know, our project team is more than willing to go ahead and do that. So, you know, that's kind of my long-winded answer to your question. I'd be happy to follow up on anything. Or...
No, I really appreciate the detail of your answer. And I think I've asked this question once before, but maybe I just want to, so you mentioned I don't know if I'm going to use the right word, right? But does the whatever traffic study occurred, right? Does it take into account to what extent does it take into account the nature of this particular 4-lane road? You know what I'm saying? Is it like just any generic road that I think you mentioned the Ashto something or other? I'm not sure what it was, but is that?
Are you talking with respect to volume or site distance?
I don't know. I'm just saying that there's, to a layman, if there's 4 lanes of traffic, people drive wackily in. Is that taken into account in any way in the standards against which this safety of this project is measured?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And basically analysis tells us is that, you know, it's a 4-lane cross section, which we understand. There's 2 lanes in each direction. So the model knows that. It also knows that there's only one exiting lane. So it's not like there's lefts and there's right, and you can kind of separate those out. You know, we're only anticipating one exit lane here, which is shown on the rendering in front of you. So what that highway capacity manual does is it measures the volume of that 4-lane roadway against the volume from the proposed site driveway. So the volume, and again, we took the traffic count, so that volume is based on that number, projected 7 years into the future per Mass DOT and highway capacity manual standards for future analysis. And what that does is, you know, whatever that volume does is there's some sort of mix in that traffic, right? If it's 2,000 vehicles per hour, it's, you know, not all 2,000 vehicles in 10 minutes, like it's spread out over that hour. So when we analyze the peak of that intersection, we're only looking at the peak 15 minutes.
Okay.
And so we're saying, okay, in peak 15 minutes of the peak hour of the day.
Yep.
So not only are we looking at, okay, weekday morning, weekday afternoon, we're looking at the peak 15 minutes of that peak. So it's really only like somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4% per day. Are we even measuring this again? So when I say, you know, we anticipate 35 seconds of delay, that's using A, the peak of the peak, and B, this is using the trip generation manual based on other sites of this nature in this sort of environment. And again, you know, Deb just showed a, you know, bike racks and all of that. So in our analysis numbers, we didn't take into account folks that are going to bike to the site or folks that may decide to not own a car for whatever reasons. So when we analyzed our numbers, we didn't take into account anyone that would walk to the site or take bikes to the site. And, you know, so we're trying to be as conservative as we could at every turn of the page so that we could present an analysis that we felt was conservative. And that demonstrates that it is conservative because, we understand this. It's a 4-lane cross section, it's pulling up here at 7 o'clock in the morning and taking a left, may be perceived as challenging, but, based on, my engineering judgment and, the standards that AASHTO provides and Highway Capacity Manual provides says that it's an acceptable amount of delay.
All right, that's extremely helpful. I'm very grateful for you taking the time to help me understand how the models and the analysis, the tools that you use, how they actually do take into account the particular facts and circumstances of this intersection. So I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Okay, happy to help.
Yep. So I think what I would like to do is, if it's all right with everyone, is hear from, since I've been sort of hammering the site part of it, maybe hear from Mr. Reardon and then hear from Mr. Bomer.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Sean Reardon with Tetra Tech, the board's technical review consultant for civil and traffic. And Nick, just to add to what's already been said, the sight distance is really the key thing to sort of being safe at intersections. So if you can see traffic coming far enough ahead, you should be able to enter onto the roadway safely. So sight distance considers principally the speed of the traffic on the road. So to answer your question about how fast people are traveling, the speed of the traffic informs how far you have to be able to see down the road. So that 400 feet that you see in this plan, if the speeds were slower, that would only need to be 300 feet. So that's how that speed component is taken in. It also considers the slope of the road. So when you're calculating sight distance, if the road's pitched in one particular direction, obviously if you're going downhill, it's harder to slow down. So it even takes that into consideration. So a lot of those particulars you're concerned about are rolled up into the sight distance number. And that's why it's something that's pretty important to us to keep track of all the time. And I think they've demonstrated now that they've got adequate sight distance on both directions. And another important thing to understand too is the standard says 14.5 feet. You measure it back 14.5 feet. But there is general consensus with the industry that somewhere between 14.5 and say 10 feet is reasonable. So there is, that 14.5 is a pretty conservative measurement because you can sort of creep up on the intersection and increase your line of sight. So, I'm pretty comfortable at this point that their sight distances are good and that the exiting movement that you talk about, I don't have that many concerns about. I am still sort of anxious and nervous about just how close the house at 736 is to the road. So, I don't want to, in saying that the exiting traffic, I'm comfortable. That doesn't extend to how comfortable I am with the entering traffic and potential impacts to the house at 736. So as you can imagine, as people turn into the site from a road that's traveling 50 miles an hour, the tendency for people to be taking a left into the site from Route 28, if something happens, they're heading right towards the corner of that house. So that's really the exiting. I'm not terribly concerned about. It's more of that the home at 736 that is sort of where my anxiety sits right now.
All right, that's very, very helpful. Again, I thank you both for helping me to understand that. Mr. Reardon, is there anything you need to say about the stormwater management portion of the presentation, or are we?
Yeah, well, just a couple things. So I think Deb's right. We've worked pretty well together and addressed all the sort of the boring technical stuff related to stormwater. We still have some minor issues with, just detail stuff. There's still some trees in the swale, so we'll have a conversation about that. But really, I think it boils down to is the plan you're looking at right now, in my mind, is representative of what's capable of meeting the standard. So there are no big sort of things that haven't been addressed that will fundamentally change the design. What you see is principally what could be constructed conceivably. That doesn't mean we still don't have some outstanding issues. My whole concern about the proximity of 736, I still think that there's information that's conveniently left out on like the renderings. For example, the current plan shows a sliver of, Deb, if you could go back to the layout plan.
Yeah, I can show that.
And Deb, I don't mean to hang you out there, but we've talked about this.
Yes.
So right now, there's a proposal to saw cut along the easement line. and leave a sliver of pavement that extends from the bituminous
Yeah.
concrete drive out to the road.
Right here.
To me, it's not reflected that way in the renderings. So my suggestion is, if it's not shown to be done, it's work that shouldn't be shown on the renderings. And it's just an awkward little thing that's left out there, but it speaks to the sort of the whole adjacency issues that haven't really, in my mind, aren't really that well addressed given how close that house is. Another issue on the rendering is the rendering doesn't show that wall in front of 736 actually, I think, is intended to extend 2 feet above grade to act as a vehicle barrier.
Yeah.
The rendering doesn't show that wall extending 2 feet above grade. So, and if you can imagine, if you've got windows along the side of 736, that wall's 2 feet higher, sort of makes a big difference, right? So what I'm concerned now is sort of the issues on the perimeter, and that we've spent so much time dealing with sort of the nuts and bolts of the site that we really haven't focused on the awkward ones along the perimeter, principally the things next to 736, which, I look to explore a little bit more with Deb in the coming days.
Excellent. That's very, very helpful. Let's see. Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions for Mr. Reardon?
No questions.
All right. Maybe a good place to go next would be to hear from Mr. Bomer, if he's still on. I don't have him on my screen, about if he has any comments as to the architectural or other aspects of the project.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm recovering from a cold. It's not COVID. I've been tested all over the place. So I may cough every once in a while. I think you know that some of these exhibits are quite new, so we haven't had them for very long, but I have spent a decent amount of time looking at them. And I'll mention a couple of things. We have had some response on issues that we had that were brought up in my letter that was written back in April. And I think the attorneys represented that accurately. There have been some responses to that. But as I was hoping, some of the new materials that have provided have really served as an excellent window into where we actually are in the design process. And I think in particular, the landscape plan and the renderings that are dated July 8th, there was a new set of renderings. And I think it's important for the board to know, as I'm working for you, these renderings are used as design tools. This isn't a project that's been cast in stone. Obviously, it's not an approved project. So at this stage, designers, landscape architects, and civil engineers use these as design tools. And I'm very glad they provided these, because I do think it brought up a couple of issues, really strengthened, I think, the need to address some outstanding issues that carry over to the site plan. And then at this point, I have some very small comments on the building plans, other than to point out that I think some of the responses to what were primarily resident-oriented concerns, they are evident in the plans, but to me, it's almost a kind of check the box mentality that they heard us and they put it in the plans, but I think it's still worthy of further study. So I think where I'd like to start, since Mr. Reardon brought up where his anxiety is, I think particularly if you wouldn't mind going to the next rendering, which is the street level view up the driveway, the renderings really increased my anxiety about how close that existing house actually is to the driveway. And to me, it's not, if I were the designer of this project, that would feel way too close to me, and I would really question the location of the driveway. I think it's not only does it lack screening, shall we say, on the north side of that existing house, but I actually do believe that Sean brings up a legitimate point that left turning cars who may see a car coming towards them right after the light changes may rush a bit, or the person behind the first person will rush to try to get in there too. And I see that as truly hazardous. I live in a tight residential area of Cambridge, and I actually do see homes that have cars crash into them. That concerns me particularly because this is just this is a vision at this point. This isn't a foregone conclusion that that's exactly where that driveway needs to be. So I think I share that anxiety. I think it's way too early in the design to be really pushing an idea ahead that is, in my mind, obviously failing. And I think it fails from any opportunity for screening or screening from the impact of headlights and cars coming and going, but could literally represent a safety hazard. So I'll bring that up right up front. I will say that also on the site planning perspective, although I will say also, while you're looking at this image, I think I give a lot of credit to the team for solving that the accessibility path issue of getting a truly accessible path from the apartment building down to the road. It's my belief, totally a code requirement, and they did make it happen. But I think we know that it did impact that southern side of that slope. And in my mind, there's a lot of space there that they've been playing with, and which even for me makes a stronger argument for, well, if you can push it over that far, then maybe it needs to go over further so that we can get further away from that existing home. But anyway, I'll continue on the site planning perspective, going all the way back to the project eligibility letter, which was issued in July of 21, up through my commentary in April of 22, and right up through a very recent letter that was written by an attorney, Attorney McEtrick, who's representing one of the neighbors, dated June 29th. I think there are legitimate ongoing concerns, starting back at the Pell, the issuance of the Pell, and of course, before that, the town commenting on the site plan, that if this type of approach is undertaken, where clearly the building itself has no relationship to any of the nearby residential buildings, that potentially a legitimate option is offering sufficient screening from the public way. And as importantly, mentioned in, as I said, in the Pell, in my letter, and in the neighbor's attorney's letter that I just read today, actually, there is, I think, legitimate concern about inadequacy of the screening, which is why I mentioned at the beginning the landscape plan. I appreciated having a landscape plan. And interestingly, I think what we see in the landscape plan, and I did have a question for the applicant, because the landscape plan that you showed tonight is slightly at variance with, yeah, there you go, thank you. You do show trees planted along the access road, and maybe I'm one landscape plan behind this one, but mine doesn't have those. Small detail, although I'll get to where I think there could be. You can leave this one on the screen. I think this demonstrates, I think, something that I think is causing some issues. Certainly you can see from this diagram that the screening from 718, which is the one to the north, the property to the north is limited to what we see as one line of arborvitae as well as an area of the existing site that we really don't know what's in that area. I think it says existing, it's a little small for me to read, but something like existing vegetation remain, something along those lines, up in that corner, in the northwest corner. And I think there is a problem with that. And again, I think the renderings do an honest and accurate job of showing us that if the building is of this kind of scale, not within the typical vernacular of nearby residential buildings, I think then that you can see that the screening that is, I think, can be a legitimate approach. I mentioned it in my letter that I think this project has an opportunity to be screened sufficiently, certainly from the public way, although I do have some comments on that. But in my mind, it's really not doing it at this point. And I already talked a little bit about the neighbor to the southwest, or southwest corner at the entry point. There's really no screening there. And even if you look up from the perspective view that was provided for us from that address, I think you can see that at a minimum, to meet that screening requirement, if you buy into the legitimacy of there being a larger building that's well set back from the road, that has screening potential, then I believe that a better job can be done at that screening. The point I wanted to bring up with, and I apologize for being a little bit scattershot, but I really have only had very little time to review this, and I'm happy to put it all in one place. But what this drawing shows to me is that in the north-south direction, or maybe it's northwest, southeast direction, the axis that's perpendicular to the long dimension of the building, it's very squeezed. And I think we see the consequences of that in the ability to really properly screen, the ability to have a larger size playground, the ability to have plantings between the parked cars that are directly aimed at the windows of the first floor units. There's a very narrow strip available for landscaping in that area. And there's really no slack in that direction. And the only things that when I was sketching on top of the drawings that we were provided, can the building be moved closer to the access road? Move it 6 feet in that direction to get so that the whole system can kind of move towards the southeast, but something to relieve that pressure. Interestingly enough, that same problem of being really pickled in there is that it really precludes options for articulating the building, which is another tool that architects have for making a better fit of the building with the vernacular. Again, I will say that the really close by vernacular is limited to the 2 homes, but I do believe, and I mentioned it in my letter back in April, that some articulation in that footprint would help, in addition to the recessed balconies and the other devices that the architect has employed, including the broken up roof line and striations horizontal to break up the massing. There still is a tremendous value in actually having a little more movement in the footprint. And as you can see from this plan, we're constrained in that direction as well, all for the same reason. The width of the parking lot is fixed. The width of the building, at least given the unit sizes, is fixed. And it left us in a position where I think, as I believe the renderings demonstrate, that we're suffering from the problem of inadequate screening from the neighbors. As far as the screening from the public realm, the landscape plan does show us, I think, some opportunities for helping that screening from the public realm. And actually, there are a few trees on this plan that aren't on my plan in that southwest corner. of the building. I also think that the landscape or the renderings show us that both screening of the large mass of the building and screening of that rather large accessible structure would be achievable by plantings on the south side of those major ramp structures. They could do double duty of screening the building as well as kind of screening a very large concrete structure that is, it's a good thing it's there, but it takes a little work to make it look good. And I think landscaping, enhanced landscaping in that area would help an awful lot as well. I know that you know that I have harped on this idea of the fact that this is a home ownership development. I'll repeat that most of the home ownership deals that I review or that I design myself have many more amenities or more generous amenities, both inside and outside, which brings me back to what I said. I appreciate that we did talk to them about a community room, and they did add a community room, but the community room is tucked in against a buried wall at the parking level. Given that the southeast facade of that building at the parking level has exposure to light and nice views, one wishes that a room that would be a nice community room could possibly be on that side of the building. So I appreciate that they heard us and put it in there. I question whether or not that was the right place to put it. Other things that Sean mentioned, a couple of things that don't show up in the renderings. Again, I appreciate those renderings because they really do help you imagine this project. I think there was a reference in the civil drawings to railings along some of the railings along the, I believe it was on the south side of the driveway on top of that 2-foot retaining wall that Sean was bringing up. That's not on the drawings. I think another potential code issue that that these drawings help us understand. There is a dog walking area now in the northeast corner of the building. I'm not sure that we see an accessible path to get to that dog walking area. It is an amenity that all the residents should have access to. I'll quickly, I know I'm taking up too much time here, but I still don't see bike racks on the outside of the building for visitors to the building who might want to park their bikes. Jumping into the building for a moment, I think at least relative to the other projects we've reviewed in Milton, I think the number of bike spaces is light. And what's represented currently. I will say that again, if the designers were, went through another generation of trying to pull a lot of these concerns or address a lot of these concerns in another iteration, I would suggest that as we've seen in other actually projects in Milton, if they introduce the slope in the parking level floor, it's possible that they could lose some of those parking spaces on the outside and pick them up on the inside with stackers at the far end, at the low end of a sloped parking garage, so that you could open up some more usable outdoor space. Might be a way to help. What else? A few details: a missing elevator machine room. The roof plan, I think, may not reflect the actual scale of the equipment that could be required on the roof. Ensuring that there is an accessible path to the mail pickup area. I'm not sure we've heard about the potential school bus pickup point yet. And I think that's it. I guess my summary would be through everything I've reviewed to date, I've seen a lot of movement in a lot of ways that have helped this development. But I think as the documents have really started to address the number of concerns that have come up, I think we're really seeing some of what I would call the kind of fundamental issues of fit on the site. I think I can live and have lived with many 40B developments that use maybe a different interpretation of 760 CMR, the design criteria that I think is primarily aimed at the subsidizing agencies. But I do believe that there can be a legitimate approach of a different type of integration that largely deals with landscaping that really makes larger buildings work because of smaller landscape elements that help to screen it. I think this building does have the potential, but I think we're hitting potentially hitting a wall on some of the space available to really successfully achieve that kind of fit or I think legitimate interpretation of what was, again, goes all the way back to the project eligibility back in July of 21. So I haven't had a lot of time to review it, but a lot of things jumped out to me, and I'll credit the developer with providing us the documentation we asked for, because that's where we really learn things. And especially for you folks who may not look at technical drawings the same way that Sean looks at them or I look at them, but the renderings were a terrific tool for me, and I hope that we can see some progress on some of these issues that I brought up. And as I said, I'm happy to try to put them all in one place or have another working session or whatever it might take to help advance this project to another level.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bomer, for your helpful comments. Let me see if my fellow board member this evening, Mr. Mullen, has any questions.
I don't have any questions right now, Nick. Thank you.
All right. I don't have any questions at the moment either. Let's see. I don't think we've heard yet from the town planner. Maybe this would be a great moment to see if Mr. Freeman, can you remind me before I go to Mr. Zawadzki, is there additional elements to your presentation tonight? I hate to break it up, but trying to.
No, there's no additional presentation. I would just say, as to Mr. Bomer's comments right now, there's no point, there's no debate that I'm trying to get into. I'm sure that our team has listened and will try to do whatever we can. But I must say, the workshop, it sounded like a different planet because his comments were much more positive, such as most issues were addressed. He appreciates the responsiveness, including the common space programmatic aspects that he discussed. So, I'm not saying that that the points tonight, are therefore inappropriate, but it is, I guess I just am disappointed that the value of the workshop seems to have been somewhat reduced based on all of these concerns now. I guess I still think we can address them, but I must say that it seems like completely a different take than what we were told at the workshop, but I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Zawadzki, do you have any comments on what you've heard this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I don't have much beyond what Sean and Cliff have raised. One thing that, I don't want to get too far out of my lane, pun intended, on transportation planning. I am not a transportation planner, but just hearing, Sean and Cliff kind of raise the concern about the kind of proximity of the driveway to that existing house at 736. I think a lot of things have come together here in a kind of big way in terms of big moves. And I think that's one thing that maybe slipped under the radar a little bit. And so, I understand the driveway is where it needs to be. And it's got to provide the access that's necessary for the site. But I do think we should be thinking critically about a solution to mitigate potential impacts on that existing house. I don't know if it's as extreme as a bollard treatment or some type of other type of barrier or something, but I do think, the concern about having, those turning movements into the site, with that house right there, I think it does merit a little extra care and a little extra deliberation. I hesitate to offer a specific solution, except to say that I agree with Sean and Cliff that it should be looked at a little bit more closely, and do what we can at this point. But I confess I do need to take a little bit closer look at the plans. We got them late in the week last week, so I've had a cursory look, but it was good to hear the presentation and to hear from Sean and Cliff to kind of inform my closer look. And, at some point, maybe later on in this hearing or at the next hearing, we should talk about scheduling some time for town staff to come in and testify. In other hearings, I've liked to do that when we're kind of closer to the finish line in terms of having, what Sean and Cliff would consider to be final kind of reports. I don't want to have our folks kind of looking at a moving target. I think that's what we pay Sean and Cliff for, is to look at the moving target. So, whether we're close to that or not, we should talk about later. And I'll get stuff into my fellow department heads' hands, and we can figure out a time for them to come in and testify and offer any comments.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Zawiski. I appreciate that. I think your idea of bringing in your fellow town employees a little later, once the design is a little closer along, is excellent. We definitely want to hear from them. I think it would behoove us all. I'm very taken with the analysis, some further analysis as to the effect of this project on 736 Randolph Avenue. And now that we've got the renderings, it really does help snap into focus how that property could very well be affected by this design. So I second the comments about taking a further look to see what can be done to mitigate the impacts to that property and also to provide additional safety. So with that in mind, maybe since Mr. Freeman, I think the applicant's presentation is pretty much finished up, I would like to hear from Mrs. McKettrick if she has anything she would like to comment about and what she's heard this evening.
Excuse me, Mr. Gray.
Yep.
This is Deb.
Yep. Sorry. Hi, Deb. Sorry.
I just wanted to touch on a few things briefly. Some of the things that Cliff mentioned, just for clarification purposes.
Go right ahead. I think that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. He asked for the access to the dog area. So that would come off the front sidewalk, and there is accessible walking path down to the gate to access from the front of the building down the corner side. So there is room there for accessibility. We also did originally have bike racks outside. I think there was some discussion in a previous hearing where we didn't want to have that, so we took them off, but I have maintained space along this sidewalk here that if we want to add those outside bike racks back, we can. We have that room to do that. We do have an accessible walkway down to the mail pedestal here, so there is accessibility to the mail station. I know they're small items, but I just wanted for clarification to identify those, as well as just to note, and I understand and I respect the concern with regards to 736, but just for clarification, that southerly curb line is on top of the existing curb line that is current now. So we are not pushing the driveway any closer to that residence. I know it's still a concern.
Yeah, you're adding a huge number of units to the property though. So I think it's a relevant consideration. I understand you're not moving it, but
yes,
certainly the level of use you would say is certainly going to be increased. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we weren't coming any closer to that structure than the current driveway now, just for clarification, that's all. But yes, I agree. We can definitely look at that again and see if there's anything that we can fine tune. But thank you very
No,
much.
thank you. I appreciate your additional comments.
Hey, Nick,
Let's try again to see if I can get to Mrs. McKettrick. Mrs. McKettrick, would you like to say anything at this time?
I don't have a lot to add, and I have limited time myself tonight. I'm very happy to be here and to have heard the comments. My comments about design, our comments from the residents at 718 are in my letter. So I appreciate it if everybody reviews that if they haven't had time. And I appreciate the comments that were just made about design that in some instances reference my comments. And we focused primarily on access on the driveway and whether there might be a good alternative in previous letters, and not so much on design and landscaping. So the letter I just sent to the board did focus on design and landscaping. And some of those comments have been repeated, and I'm not going to repeat them again, except to say that one of the things I did do to prepare for this and to meet with my clients was to review the 40B guidelines. I'm very familiar with the design guidelines. I realize that probably they're not followed as much as we would like them to be, but they're there for a reason. And I think this particular site and building illustrates exactly or what those design guidelines were for. They were new back in, I think, 2007, and they were viewed as an improvement and a way to sort of push back a little bit in terms of generic designs and problems that those might create. So we're going to have more discussion about design. I haven't even had a chance to review all the materials that were discussed tonight, but I do understand most of the comments. Really, everything that your peer reviewer for architecture stated, I agree with, we agree with. And the problems that relate to 736, yes, they've been there all along. The problem is that it's a small driveway now. Yes, it's close to the building, but it's only used by those two buildings. So this is a tremendous change. And I'm not going to talk a great deal about traffic, about access tonight, but I do want to say once again, because I've said this, it's a number of these hearings, the issue, site distances and safety of exits onto Route 28 is always going to be an issue, always is in a development like this. But it's not the only issue. The other issue relates to how many cars fit on this right of way at any one time. How many cars are going to come out of the development during the rush hour and go back in during the rush hour at various times of the day? What the average amount of delivery service is likely to be and how much that will add to the traffic flow. Our position all along, and it really hasn't changed, is that because of the number of cars, the density of this development, access by particularly for the residents of 718 will be interfered with in a substantial way because each car has to pull up to Route 28 and has to wait. And during, varying amounts of time, depending on the traffic, but you've talked a lot about what the traffic is like on Route 28. So one car pulls up, it's waiting, then another car pulls up. And in a development this size, you're going to have cars lined up all along that driveway. So there's going to be a really long wait for 718. So, I haven't ever heard the traffic analysis talk about that particular problem, which is, well, you've heard the comments and I understand the bases for what's been discussed, but most of that relates to exiting onto Route 28. And I think the problem of traffic piling up on that roadway is a really difficult one for this development. Some of the other design issues, honestly, I think some of them can be addressed. I think some of the landscaping issues can be addressed. We made some suggestions in our letter. But I think that if the access could be changed, the whole development would work a lot better. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. McKettrick. I think we just check in with Mr. Mullen, make sure you don't have any questions at this time, or Jeff, or is there anything you want to add?
No questions.
Thank you. So let's see if at this point, if there's any member of the public that would like to ask a question or be heard on anything that's been presented this evening. I believe there's a way to raise your hand here in Zoom to indicate that. Crystal, would you help me out if there is anyone?
Yes, there's not anyone right now.
All right. Well, in that case, is there any other evidence or anything else that we need to discuss this evening?
Peter Freeman again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nothing for tonight, but I believe we do have a date that we scheduled in anticipation of needing another hearing. I believe that would be August 17th. And we also discussed, and the board okayed it, drafting a decision led by Judy Barrett and working with me. And needless to say, we didn't think, speaking for myself, that we would get to it tonight. So I would just like to remind the board and not ask for permission again. I believe it was granted, but what I would hope would be that you would give direction to your consultant, Judy, that she can work with me and hopefully have a draft in advance of August 17th for the board to review. And I know that the public, especially Mr. Driscoll, stated that he didn't want it to be preconceived that somehow a decision indicated what you're going to vote or how you're going to vote. So I'm cognizant of that as well. But even so, I know that Judy and I, having worked together many times, can draft a decision which would be essentially what you would need in ultimate, because the finding of the facts are going to be in there and those are factual, and we can put in conditions that would anticipate some type of approval, but ultimately, of course, you're going to go over it and we'll vote whatever you vote. So hopefully, again, and I know that Judy's busy, I certainly am too, but there is enough time before August 17th to get a good first draft. So that's what I hope you would ask her to work on.
All right. Well, I will ponder that for a few minutes. Jeff, do you have anything to say on that issue? Oh, your hand is up. Yes, you do.
I don't remember saying that ever in a hearing.
I don't either. But
So I'm gonna
right.
I have to disagree with Mr. Freeman. Nor do I think we need to. I think if the board wants to speak to its consultants about tasking it to do something, it can do that. But it doesn't seem to me an appropriate thing for a vote.
Yeah,
Well, I'm not asking about a vote. What I
Yes,
said.
you did. Yes, you did. You asked for a vote. Actually, you said that you previously authorized it in an earlier meeting, which
I don't think that's what I said, but I didn't mean to ask for a vote. Plus the fact that you go back and check, and you can ask Judy. I recall vividly that there was a discussion about wanting to leave time to keep the hearing open so that a draft decision could be reviewed, because Judy said publicly at the last CBA hearing on this project that was the process that was normally done in most of your other projects, and it was beneficial. And it happened not to be done that way on the East Milton Square project that I was also the attorney for. So I'm not meaning to question what you may or may not want to do, but I recall vividly that was discussed last time. So I thought I was simply reminding you, and I do think that it's beneficial to have a draft decision that can be reviewed during the hearing process. And we did extend to September 23rd, which seems like it's adequate. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not making anything up.
I disagree. You just said two inconsistent statements, so we didn't have that conversation. Let me just finish, okay? Let me finish, please. I'm the board member, you're the attorney. That's not what happened in the last hearing. From my perspective, I think this board, as any hearing I've had, we've never had that conversation. We've never had a vote, which you did indicate earlier in your comments. We don't need to debate it. It just didn't happen. We'll talk to the chair about how he would like to conduct the hearing, and we'll get in touch with Ms. Barrett, but we don't have to do it in a public session. And I don't disagree that having the draft a decision is a good thing. I just don't think we've talked about it in this forum.
Well, that's fine. I certainly don't in any way mean to be offensive. Maybe possibly it was at the workshop, but I don't think so. If I did say something about a vote, I apologize.
You did.
Maybe I spoke too quickly. I certainly didn't mean to either state or imply anything about a vote. I just meant leading up to ultimately a decision to review. As you just said, yes, it would be helpful. So sorry for any misunderstanding. Thanks.
All right. That being the case, Mrs. Barrett, I'll just give you the quick, since your name was used in vain, do you have, and please feel free to decline if you wish, but is there anything you wish to add at this point?
No, Mr. Chair or Mr. Chair Pro Tem.
Yeah, whatever I am. Yeah.
Wait for direction from the board.
Fine. Thank you.
When you want me to work on something like this, you know that I'll do it. And
Understood. Just didn't want to cut you off.
No, it's fine.
You wanted to say.
I'm here to help you, so that's fine.
And we are greatly appreciative of your help. All right, if there's no further evidence to come before the board this evening, I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Should you officially, if I may, just, although discussed at the last hearing, but also move to continue to August 17th?
I mean, sure, yeah. All right, fine. Is that the next scheduled hearing?
That's what I have. That's what I have written down from last time is the 17th.
All right. That's fine with me. Does the 17th work for you, Mr. Mullen?
Yeah, that's fine.
And I don't remember whether it works for Mr. Brown, but I suppose we'll find out. All right, so all in favor of continuing this hearing to August 17th?
Yeah.
Aye. No, there's no one no. Okay. So we're continued to August 17th. Is there anything else to come before the board this evening? All right, on that, with Mr. Mullen's assent, I guess we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.